One of the best legends in Riftbound right now is Master Yi for very good reason. Boasting colors with ramp and counter magic, it's a pairing that really is a match made in heaven in a tempo metagame. And in today's video, I wanted to go over two of my favorite interactions in this deck that many of you should be abusing as soon as possible. Now, for those of you high level players out there, you might be aware of this already. You might have been at the receiving end of it, if you will. But when it comes to folks that are learning or maybe trying to step up their game when it comes to Master Yi, I think these are the key things that you need to take advantage of in terms of location placement, but also in terms of how you're using your spells as a level to advance up to make sure you're able to secure those wins. Now, this is a deck list that I actually proxied up from the recent CCS in Atlanta that took second place. And Master Yi is a legend that says, while a friendly unit defends alone, it gets +2 might. So not only when you are able to take over a location through some tempo methods, are you going to be able to do so in a relatively easy fashion with the amount of counter magic and interaction you have, but also you're going to be able to defend it really passively, really easily with no extra kind of motivation there. And the first card that I want to talk about is going to be Charm. Now, this is a card that at level 1 for the beginners, it says move an enemy unit. Now, if you don't have an understanding of the rules, you might actually be missing out on some extra key pieces you need here. So when it comes to moving an enemy unit, it's not just about moving a unit off of a location. Maybe you just want to make sure that they don't score on their kind of turn after they come back. And there are situations, especially against bigger units like a out of a Dazzling Aurora deck or a Mundo, that you do just want to kind of move it out of the way. But a lot of times what actually happens is that moving a unit here, you can actually move it into a location, or you can move it from an opposing battlefield. Let's say your opponent controls both of them. You can do multiple things to make certain scenarios work for you. And yes, moving a unit with Charm, as far as I'm aware on the rules, doesn't have any restriction. If you were to move an enemy unit from one battlefield to the other, if they were to conquer that battlefield, yes, they get the point, but also that unit doesn't require ganking. So you can actually do some really, really tricky things. Now, you can't do this with your own. It specifically says any enemy unit, but being able to move it to and from base and between battlefields is really powerful, especially if you are able to defend alone. So for example, let's say you have something like a tasty Fey Folk by itself on a battlefield. Obviously, maybe you were accelerated out to do something insanely powerful. Your opponent did not want to buff into it by kind of feeding you the Death Knell, the draw, and the Channel 2 runes, so they didn't want to do all that. But then what you do is maybe the turn after, you use Charm to then start throwing enemies into it. If your opponent has a unit in base, you can use Charm to move it into the battlefield with a Tasty Fey Folk to force a showdown and then potentially just wipe out a small unit that's just like a Poro, like a 2 might unit. And then what happens is for each of those individual showdowns, this Tasty Fey Folk or the unit that you have there, thanks to your legend here in Master Yi, is going to gain +2 might. So then you charm a unit into the Tasty Fey Folk, it's going to be a 7/8 in that case. So that's what's fantastic there. On top of that, after each individual showdown, you actually heal up. So if you have multiple charms in hand, of course, only 3 copies, but there are going to be situations where you have multiple. If you have multiple in your hand, then you can move multiple units into it and heal up the Tasty Fey Folk over and over again. What you can then also do is create situations where your opponent has multiple units locked up, gummed up in another battlefield. You have this one with the Tasty Fey Folk, and you're in a situation where, you know, you're not going to be able to attack into that, even if you had like a Dead Bloom Predator in your hand. Now, if you were to take a unit from there, bring it over to the Tasty Fey Folk from that other battlefield, because again, Charm doesn't have a restriction on it. Usually what happens is that it'll restrict you on the movability based on the rules. It has to have like ganking on it, or it'll say move it in between specifically the base and the battlefield, not base to base, something like Yasuo. But Charm says move an enemy unit in any way. No restriction. So you can then take your opponent's Kaisa on there, their Darius, which doesn't have the buff, bring it over. Now that their cleave can't even defend into it, because if they were to bring the Darius over, Darius is a 5, this Tasty Fey Folk is an 8, you can make it so both of those units then die at that point. No one conquers, but you get the Death Knell ability out of it, gaining some runes back for, you know, kind of powering out the Charm, which you kind of recycle a rune for. And so something like this move is actually fantastic and is that next level up. Moving an enemy unit is, again, powerful if it's something big, something like a Mundo or something out of a Dazzling Aurora deck. But if you were to move a enemy unit into your own base, you're able to double up and really maximize on the ability of your champion, and is that level 2 understanding of how to use charm, when to use it, and potentially just saving it so you're not using it early and for an early interaction to just let something go away. There are going to be situations where you do just let a unit kind of go away, and you might be able to create a favorable situations where, again, you are able to heal up over multiple showdowns to be able to create bad situations for your opponent. And that's why Master Yi is able to tempo out. Imagine doing that with something like specifically a Kiana. Now, when it comes to the Kiana, when Kiana conquers, you're going to be able to kind of channel one rune and or draw, not or, sorry, it's going to be or draw. But then when you then charm into the Kiana, what's frustrating about this is that some decks don't even have like necessarily a lot of buffs for their own units. If you're up against Kai'Sa, like, yeah, they're gonna have the cleave and everything, but some decks like primarily have removal, and that's going to be also frustrating because not only do they have to then contend to this being a 4/6 thanks to the legend ability, but also the deflect is also going to further tempo them out. So they're going to have to create really like suboptimal situations for you and have to play around you having this ability to like move things around. It really creates like this lock. Now that's going to be the first interaction specifically with charm. The next one I want to think about is specifically with a location. So Vilemaw's Lair says that units can't move from here to base. Now this is going to be great against the Yasuo decks, obviously, but a card like this is fantastic for decks that have retreat in them. So there's that hidden card. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it's a 2-cost. You can hide it, and then you just like move an enemy unit or whatever, or like you just move a unit, right? And what you can do with this is a lot of times people use that to just like retreat back to base, or if you're playing against someone like Annie that has the card that allows you to kind of move units back into base, Vilemaw's Lair kind of traps you there. And what's beautiful about that is specifically when it comes to something like the kind of Master Yi deck, is there are situations where you do want to move things around. Like obviously you're going to have the Master Yi in your champion unit that is going to be able to have ganking and move between battlefields and all that stuff. But specifically when it comes to moving around cards like the Dead Bloom Predator, you can't move it back when it comes to something like that. But what's beautiful is that a lot of times your opponent will then have to like ultimately commit to that battlefield. And there could be situations where you specifically put in your gear of Zhonya's Hourglass to allow your own units to potentially cheat that. So they could put in a bunch of resources trying to get rid of a Dead Bloom or whatever it is, and then ultimately you just flip the Zhonya's over, and then you're able to move. It's not a move obviously, but bring your unit back to base to be able to use back. So that's another trick that I think is fantastic, and it's one that specifically you want to keep in mind if you happen to choose Vilemaw's Lair. You're up against a Yasuo opponent or whatever it is, maybe in a game 2, game 3, whatever. Specifically when it comes to Lair, this is the type of interaction that you want to force into. And honestly, your opponent's going to be like pretty ready with the fact that that's what you're doing. But another cool interaction that you can take advantage of in the Master Yi deck. Now, as mentioned, these are interactions that many of the mid to high level players are already aware of, but videos like this do happen to come across the introductory players. We're only in set 1, so of course there's going to be the keyboard warriors telling me, yes, I already, they already know this. This is level 1 stuff. But I guarantee you, a lot of people aren't aware of this. They're maybe looking to pick up the deck and trying to understand why it's powerful. And these are 2 great interactions in the deck that are already powerful that maybe exist in like the level 2 space. The level 1 is that like, hey, yeah, Dead Bloom Predator can be played to occupied battlefields, and Master Yi can enter ready and all that stuff. So immediately when you paid for 7, it's able to go somewhere and all that stuff. So there are those level 1 synergies, but how you use certain cards really gets you to eke out certain tempo wins and makes it so your opponent's cards are completely useless. Like if you're able to clear your opponent's board, those Teemo players are going to have a real hard time hiding things into boards that they're not even conquering. And some cards that exist, even out of the Kai'Sa deck, yes, they're able to interact with you directly, but something like the Cleave or something like a Retreat only really works against units that already exist on a battlefield. If you're able to clear that out, if you're able to clear or create suboptimal situations, then those cards are going to be used out of tempo, not in the places that they want. And that is how you want to make sure your opponent is playing on your terms. And that's where you're going to get the most value out of your gameplay. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know if you want to see more kind of small breakdowns like this of maybe not full deck guides, but cool little interactions in decks to really help you maybe level up or take your beginner Riftbound game to the next level.